What do you need to do next year to come back better?
I don't know what I need to do. I got a non-guaranteed contract. I don't know if I'm going to be back, right? So I'm going to leave that to Rich Paul, my agent. We'll see what's going to happen. As far as right now, I'm just going to get away from basketball and see, what my next step should be. We'll see what's going to happen. I'm not sure if I'm coming back or what team direction is, and we'll look at that later.
Hello, and welcome into this off-season edition of The Breakdown. I'm your host, Danny Marang, and those are the sweet, sweet, dulcet tones of a one, Jusuf Nurkic. Probably a suboptimal press conference. We kind of hit on this a little bit when it first happened, but I kind of wanted to pocket it to come back to it because I think there was a lot more big picture stuff there. Again, hinting at agent, not good. Hinting at agency, not good. Hinting at not sure if I'm going to be here. Also not good. Jusuf Nurkic, is he going to be a part of this franchise going forward? It's a big question, and not just in like the proverbial, what are they going to do? But legitimately, you have to look at, is Jusuf Nurkic the guy going forward, because he only has 1 year left. And if that year's not picked up, when you're talking about what Jusuf Nurkic means to the Portland Trailblazers, it starts with his playmaking and his defense. Those are the two things that he brings to this team that nobody else does. He's primary ability as a playmaker, finding guys as cutters, passing guys open. Does that thing where, Lamar Hurd highlighted a couple times this season, if you're a cutter, he'll find you. And it was both an uplifting thing to Jusuf Nurkic, and every time he said it, I always felt like it was yeah, he does do that. It would be nice if somebody else did that. It's kind of one of those situations. But bballindex.com, they've got great breakdowns and some more intricate and detailed stuff, particularly as it pertains to passing and passing creation and volume, creativity, skill sets. They've got 4 different groupings, and I looked at big men, and there's 36 centers in the league who qualified with over 500 minutes played, and only 9 of them rated a B+ or better in the different categories. And then those different categories, again, it's creation, it's volume, it's ability, basically. And when you look at it, you had Bam, you had Cousins, you had Nurkic, you had Cat, Gasol, Plumlee, Jokic, Vucevic, and Hartenstein, which he must have just made the cut. But it just kind of shows you that it's a very, very limited, it's a scarce skill set to have bigs who have those playmaking components that tick all the boxes. A lot of guys in that group had a 3, ton had 2, and everybody obviously had 1 at least. But that's where you get kind of in that more elite set, and that's where you talk about over the years, the scarcity of shooting was that market efficiency that you could capitalize on. I think the next market efficiency or deficiency is that there's only so many guys who can legitimately pass. And I've heard people say, anybody can pass. No, they can't. Not anybody can pass in the NBA. There are some very bad passers in the NBA. In fact, the skill gap between the non-passers and the great passers is quite extensive. And Nurkic is in that upper echelon of passers, particularly for bigs. And so if you're talking about the Portland Trailblazers, what he means is that he's the guy that has, Dame and CJ have this shot creation bag. Nurk has the passing bag. No look, wrap pass, bounce pass, one hand, right hand, left hand, over the top, through traffic, leading guys. He does it all. He's not great on the move. His pass out rate on drives, once that ball hits the floor twice, forget about it. It's gone. That shot's going up. It's going to be a pump faker. It's going to be a foul. But before he gets there, before he gets that big butt moving, which again, not too many bigs in the NBA once they start rolling are great on the drive kickouts. But once you start getting beyond that, and you talk about him, particularly on the short roll when he catches, gets those 2 feet down and looks, his anticipation, his ability to find guys on time and in the right spot is second to none, particularly on this team. The only guys you find doing that better are quite literally the best in the NBA at it. It's the Sabonises, it's the Bams, it's the Draymond Greens, the Ben Simmonses. So when you're talking about Jusuf Nurkic and what he means to this team, you start there, his ability to create, and then I think you go to the defensive side of the ball. And on the defensive side of the ball, that's when you start seeing greatness with limitations. And by that, I mean yes, he's a very, very good rim protector. He's a huge body. But if you're trying to ask him to play above the free throw line and play actively out to 25, 30 feet, you're putting him in a bad position. To emphasize this, Rudy Gobert just won Defensive Player of the Year, and I get it. I was kind of torn, I think, who I wanted, or who I should say want, who I thought should win. But he covers up so many sins for that Utah team, and I think you saw that get exposed is when you start letting drivers, not even letting, when drivers start beating your perimeter defenders regularly, and your drop big is being asked to play outside of position, all of a sudden it's his fault that he's not protecting the rim when he's out covering a corner three-point shooter, or he's covering the rim to help but can't recover back out to the corner three-point shooter. And you saw the limitations of that drop coverage and drop coverage bigs with the inability to go small or to be a little bit more fleet-footed. When we're talking about fleet-footed, that's not how we often discuss Jusuf Nurkic or Rudy Gobert. So, but the flip side is they're both very, very good at what they do in protecting the rim. And that is one of the most valuable things you can find nowadays, particularly in the regular season. So I use that playmaking and defense as this overarching thing of, yeah, this is what he does. What can you find, or what does he mean for this team? And how are you going to replace that if Jusuf Nurkic is traded, if he decides that he doesn't want to be here? Let's say the new coach is somebody he doesn't vibe with. Let's say the Blazers aren't really down with giving him a contract extension, so they're looking to move him. There's so many different variables that are at play here. How are you going to replace those core things? And it's very, very difficult because we just got to talk about how scarce those things are. But, and here's the caveat, if you make a trade for a Ben Simmons, well, now you've got some ways to cover up for that, and maybe opens the doors to different guys and how those guys could fit along in this team as it's currently constructed. Obviously, trading for Ben Simmons means CJ McCollum's out of the way, and that's obviously a very, very different team to begin with when you're talking about roster construction. That kind of that domino falling probably means Jusuf Nurkic needs to go to balance things out, as we saw. Ben Simmons and big who wants to play around the rim don't exactly work all that well together. But next thing we're going to look at here, those obviously those things that I think are the harder to replace skill sets. But when you talk about Jusuf Nurkic and where he could improve and where another big man could maybe pass him up in this regard, although it's not that hard to pass him up. And I love Nurk, a caveat here. I love him. I love his game. I love his attitude. But his inability to finish consistently has been a problem. He rates out as an F by the same finishing metrics over at B-Ball Index, and you look at where he sits in percentile rankings on post-ups and interior finishing across the different tracking data. And it's bad. It's really bad. I'm going to have some B-roll playing over the top of me right now. And if you're watching here on YouTube, and you're going to see him finishing and looking good finishing, and you're like, yeah, that's great. That's because that's the highlight reel. That's what that is. It's the Nurk. Look at what I look like when I can and I want to finish. And that's the Nurk that I think that everybody wants every single night. And when he's on and great and fantastic, awesome. And that's when you get the defense, you get the playmaking, you get that level of finishing. Forgetting the other stuff, the pick and pops or the occasional three-pointer, you get those three things from him, and he's dominant. That's when you get those 22 point, 16 rebound, 5 assist nights, and you're like, God, this guy is good. This guy is really good. But how good is he, and how does he stack up financially in the NBA, and how big of an impact is that for the Portland Trailblazers as they sit right now and going into the 21-22 season? Let's take a look at the contract layout. Take a deep breath, get your paper bags if you need, grab a beer, whatever it is that you need, because this part, it's a tough one to swallow. All right, well, we're getting to the math portion. There will not be a test, but it does get ugly when we start talking about some numbers here with the Portland Trailblazers. I talked about this a lot going to last summer because I firmly believe that they needed to get their house in order before this season came. And this is why. So, again, I'm just going to rattle off some numbers. The Blazers have 7 players that they currently have full control over. So they don't have control over Norman Powell, they don't have control over Derrick Jones Jr., and they don't have control over Zach Collins. Obviously, Norm and Derrick Jones Jr. both have player options that they could opt into. I assume at this point in time that Derrick Jones will opt in, but for this purpose, we're not going to. Norm, he's not opting in. And then Zach Collins, you've got a qualifying offer, and yes, you technically have control as an RFA, but you don't necessarily have control of the monetary costs. So, with that in mind, you factor out Cantor's contract coming off, Melo's contract coming off, Harry Giles' contract coming off. You go down the list. This is who they currently have under contract, or who they control. Nasir Little, Anthony Simons, Jusuf Nurkic, CJ McCollum, Robert Covington, CJ Ellaby, and one Damian Lillard. In that regard, they have $111 million, $418,776 combined to those guys. 7 guys, $111.4 million. The cap is 112. If you take out the young guys, you call them the core 4. I put these pictures out as I was preparing this the other night. Between Nurk, Dame, CJ, and Cov, $100.8 million, or roughly 88% of the cap. That's not going to do it, folks. You can't have that much money tied up in those 4 guys. And this is what we have always said, or I should say I have always said, sorry if I'm pulling any of you giant CJ fans into this, about giving CJ McCollum that contract. It never made any sense. It never, ever made any sense to do it a year early, because it started the clock. There was just no point. But there's no use in kind of going back over at this point in time. But so you have all of this money committed to those guys, and you still have to fill out the rest of the roster. What are you going to do with Jusuf Nurkic? Because he's at $12 million right now. And as a theory, I started kind of like, where does Jusuf Nurkic rank among centers? Like, is he top 5? Probably not. Top 10? Yeah, I can see that. But is he like 6 through 8, or is he 8 through 10? And that's the ultimate question, because Nurk's got the remaining $12 million option. He's going to be 26 years old. And he's entering his prime, but he's also injury prone. And you've seen what happens with big bigs. Here's the funny thing. You need big bigs if you're getting matched up against these big teams like a Denver. Hell, like a Phoenix. You need those guys out there. But you also need another type to be able to play small. The Blazers don't really have the guy who can really, like Cov can to an extent, but that's another argument. But Jusuf Nurkic, he's that big who can match up with an Embiid, with a Jokic, with a Gobert, with a Vucevic, a Valanciunas, a Capella. I mean, having that big body, be able to eat space up and be effective, that's a huge deal. But here's the flip side. Right? And again, this is where we're going to have the numbers flashing all over the screen. You look at what Jusuf Nurkic is making right now, $12 million. That is half of what Vucevic just got at 30 years old. He's getting $25 million a year. Rudy Gobert, $41 million. Cat, 31.6. Embiid, 29.5. Jokic, 29.5. Adams got his extension at 17.5. Capella at 18. Valanciunas, 29 years old, $15 million. That's I think a pretty good comparison for Jusuf Nurkic, like right there. And to be honest, that's 8 centers right there, and I think you can make the argument that Nurk is in front of one of them for sure, in Steven Adams. Capella, maybe, and probably right on par with Jonas. It kind of depends on what you need. I think Jonas being more available recently makes him a bigger plus in that regard. But again, when you're talking about Jusuf Nurkic and what he means to this franchise and all of the components that go into it, it's the passing, it's the playmaking, it's the defense, it's the lack of finishing, it's the lack of availability, and now it's as, and I hate this, but it also it matters. It's as an asset. And right now, he is the only guy outside Damian Lillard not on a rookie scale contract who lives up to their contract and maybe surpasses it. I guess you can make the argument for Robert Covington, but that's it. That's it. That's all they have the control over. CJ doesn't live up to that. Dame does because of his unbelievable offense and what he can do. But beyond that, that's it. And there's just not teams that compete that have that few guys that meet or exceed that salary slot. You look at the teams that are in the playoffs right now, and you look at the Clippers. Yeah, they've got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Well, Kawhi's linked up. But you've got Terrence Mann. You've got Nick Batum. You've got Reggie Jackson. You've got so many guys that they aren't making a truckload of money. And yes, LA, and it's not a great example. Okay, how about Phoenix? You've got Cam Johnson. You've got Jay Crowder. You've got DeAndre Ayton. You've got Mikal Bridges. This is what happens when drafting and keeping those young assets. That's where it matters. That's why bottoming out sometimes matters. And so we're talking about Jusuf Nurkic and where he's going to fit going forward. He's a clutch client, remember? Does he want to have $16, $17, $18 million a year on a team that they already have $110 million committed to 7 guys? If all of a sudden, over the next couple of years, he wants $15, $16, $17, $18 million, that's cost prohibitive. Portland's not in a position to do that. And so you have to make decisions. Do you look at free agents? Do you look at trading him for a wing or a 4? Do you package him up with Robert Covington? Is he a part of a CJ McCollum deal? I mean, there's just so many different things kind of coming out of this where once you even get past what he can and can't do, but his availability, his contract demands, who his agency is. They just took a clutch client in Gary Trent Jr. and shipped him off to Toronto. Was that because they didn't truly believe in Gary as a starter? Or is it because they didn't believe in Gary as a starter and they didn't want to deal with clutch? And again, that could be another potential issue if you're talking about trading for Ben Simmons. So there's so many different factors that are at play right here. When Nurkic opened that can of worms by saying, I don't know if I'm going to be here next year, this is why. Because the Blazers are going to have, after this year, you've got Covington's deal falling off. And by after this year, I mean after 21-22. Covington's deal falls off. Nurkic's deal falls off. The only guys that aren't on rookie scale deals are Dame and CJ. That's all they have. So that's why you need to swing deals now. It's why you need to kick the proverbial contract can. You need to find some guys that are 12, 13. Like if you can find Jusuf Nurkic and trade him for somebody else of value between $12 and $15 million, those tradable contracts, if you can do the same thing with Derek Jones Jr., or if you can combine Derek and Cov and Derek and Nurk or something, some combination of those guys to balance out the roster and then go look at who's available in the free agency class or work those things out ahead of time, wink, wink, nod, nod, then it becomes a little bit easier. But as much as trading CJ is this huge thing that looms over Portland and like how effective and how good they can be, the more immediate one because of the contract situation and resolving it is Jusuf Nurkic. And the Blazers should absolutely look at trading him because when you look at who's available as a free agent, it gets a little bit dicey. And the reason it gets dicey is because you look at the free agent class and you're looking at Cody Zeller, you're looking at Rashawn Holmes, you're looking at Nerlens Noel, and you're looking at Bobby Portis. Those are kind of the cream of the crop, unrestricted free agent bigs that are out there that would kind of make sense for Portland. So I like Bobby Portis. I like Rashawn Holmes. I like Nerlens Noel. Not a Cody Zeller guy. But they all have different things that make them fit or not fit or long-term or short-term. It all depends on kind of what you're looking for. But if you're the Portland Trailblazers right now and you're looking at Jusuf Nurkic, I don't think there's a world that exists where you don't have to seriously consider trading him. And it's a realization that has hit me harder and harder and harder over the last couple of weeks, is that they almost have to trade him. Because if they extend him, number one, I think they're going to want more money. The Jusuf Nurkic camp is going to want more money than Portland can give in an extension. You're going to risk letting him go for nothing. And that would be another asset that Portland loses for absolutely nothing. And so you start looking at, well, if the Blazers don't make a move for Ben Simmons and CJ McCollum, these are restricted free agents if you're looking at different bigs. Number one, you might want one of them to back up Jusuf Nurkic. Number two, you might want to flip CJ for a big, go big for small, the Miles Turner stuff. Those are the different angles I think you have to start looking at as the Blazers press forward. So the question ultimately becomes of is Jusuf Nurkic going to be a part of this franchise going forward? If I'm like pegging a number down, I'd say there's probably like a 40% chance that he's a part of this team when the season starts. I think by the deadline, it's probably 25% of next year. I just don't think there's a way or a reason for them to make that happen. It's just cost contract prohibitive unless all of a sudden Jusuf Nurkic is willing to take a massive discount, and not by massive percentage-wise. If he wants to stay at that salary rate or drop down or have a bunch of bonuses built in that aren't guaranteed, then maybe. But listening to how he sounded at the end of the season, coupled with the fact that there was some noise about the Blazers trying to move him at the last deadline, I think there's a realistic chance that Jusuf Nurkic is moved. And you have to look at what are you going to replace, how are you going to replace it, and how does it all fit together? Because, again, we're talking about Damian Lillard's prime years. So, yeah, playmaking, defense, finishing. All of a sudden, if you give a Ben Simmons, you can get away from the playmaking, the defense, and the finishing. You're looking for floor spacing. You're looking for switchability, athleticism, rim running. It's just so many different variations of the team. And this is all to go without even getting to the head coach. Regardless of who the head coach is, how many coaches out there want to employ strictly a drop coverage? I don't know. I have a hard time believing that that's something that a coach wants to be pigeonholed into and say, this is the way we're going to do it. So at bare minimum, you're probably looking at getting a backup that doesn't exactly mirror Jusuf Nurkic. But at the same time, maybe they run it back with Enes Kanter again. Listen, he's a good regular season backup big, but I don't mean to throw old Enes under the bus, but it's just kind of hilarious at this point in time. But guys kind of who they are. But that's kind of where we're going to wrap up now. The idea of who Jusuf Nurkic is, what he means to this team, how to replace him, what they could potentially look at in free agency, trades. It's hard to peg down which bigs. Miles Turner is the one that we all know is available right now. Christian Wood is a guy to keep an eye on because age-wise he doesn't line up exactly with what Houston wants, but I just don't know if Portland has enough of what Houston wants, which is cap relief always because their owner doesn't want to spend money right now, and young assets. I think an expiring deal, a Derek Jones or a Jusuf Nurkic, is at least enticing, but there's got to be more to it, and I don't think the Blazers are willing to include the young guys, which would be Nasir Little and Anthony Simons, as they don't have draft pick this year, to make that even be palatable for either side. So it's just going to be interesting to kind of see how it goes, but when it's all said and done, I keep coming back to, there's just almost no way they can bring Jusuf Nurkic back for just this run, for just this year, because otherwise they're stuck in a position that they shouldn't have been in again because they failed to get something done. And it's getting to the point where it's both unfortunate and sad and also a little bit predictable. But we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode or watching this episode of The Breakdown. I appreciate you all. Like, rate, review, subscribe. Do all those things. If you're still here, I have another episode coming up here in a couple days. It's going to become more and more frequent as we get into the offseason. I'll have the offseason primer all built out. I hope you guys like it. Please, again, let me know what you guys think. Keep sending the questions, the suggestions, anything, good, bad, otherwise. I truly appreciate it. Thank you all so much. We'll catch up with you soon. Bye.
1